I think consultation is one of those things that has become immensely fashionable. And, Mr. Speaker, we should always be cautious of fashion, because fashion ebbs and it flows, it comes and it goes. But there is a permanence to this House, and our way of doing things and being the democratic sounding board for our constituents, rather than having endless self-selecting consultations where people are not necessarily particularly interested in the issue.
If the honourable gentleman himself has ever been fashionable, which is itself extremely doubtful, it can only have been by accident. Mr. Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Mr. Speaker, as always, you are correct. I think I would take being called fashionable as a grave insult, and I'm sure it will not happen. Mr. Speaker, your ties, I know, are a model of fashion regularly. Of course, I give way to my old friend. So that is a side concern on this, but I think it's something everybody in the House wishes to see. Of course, I give way to that.
I'm grateful for the honourable gentleman giving way, and I do apologise for missing the first 14 minutes of his short speech. But he may have covered this in that he's talked about copyright law, and I know he's an expert at companies law. Does he share that expertise of others in patent law? And will he be staying for the next bill? And he would be very helpful if he was to curtail his speech now and bring that expertise on to the next bill, and we could have a proper debate and listen to his eloquent speech.
Order. Sometimes it is difficult for the occupant of the chair to work out whether an intervention or part of a speech is in order. But the honourable gentleman has specifically referred to the next bill. So that is not in order. And I will caution Mr. Rees-Mogg to be very careful in his answer to the honourable gentleman's intervention and stick to this bill. By and by, we will come to the next bill. Mr. Rees-Mogg.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I have never sought to model myself on Nostradamus, and therefore I am not looking into a glass bowl lit by candles to see what is happening in the future. I am concentrating on the here and now, the present. And what we have at present is this very important and beneficial bill. Madam Deputy Speaker, you weren't here last week when a new tradition began, which I would like to continue, and that is of congratulating the Chairman of Ways and Means and the brilliant way in which he carries out the ballot, so that my honourable friend should have come high enough up it so that her bill came forth, and that he carried out this draw with such characteristic efficiency and workmanlike fashion that her bill came out low enough down to be high enough up that it is being debated today. It is a very considerable achievement, and I give way to my honourable friend.
I'm merely asking my honourable friend to give way, just to give the House pause to just recalibrate itself as it gets used to the idea of my honourable friend welcoming anything that's new.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for making that point, that occasionally there are innovations that are welcome, and I think this is one of them. But for those who don't know, it used to be that the draw number 1 was the first, and now number 20 is the bill that's done first. It's like a game show. It brings more tension and atmosphere into the proceedings, and that is how it has worked and how the bills have come out in the way they have. But this is a really superb bill. It is a bill for which private members' bills really exist, because it's actually deregulating. It's such a wonderfully Tory bill, a properly conservative bill, because it takes... I'm so sorry, I couldn't quite hear. There was an intervention from a sedentary position which I couldn't quite hear, but I would happily give way to the honourable gentleman if he wishes to intervene. But why is it such a wonderfully conservative bill? Because of its fundamental deregulatory nature. That we have built up a state where more and more powers have been gathered to the centre, where Whitehall has the rule over all it purveys. It tells people what they must do. When it says jump, people have to say how high. It was, of course, a Labour cabinet minister who said, the fact of the matter is the man in Whitehall really does know best. Now, it has to be said that that was a Labour cabinet minister in 1947, but the fundamental principle underpinning what the socialists believe remains the same, that control should be centralised, that if instructions and diktats come from on high, then the government of the country will be better run, and that individuals are not the people who can best take charge of this. And we as Conservatives reject that fundamentally, and it is this philosophy that underpins this bill. We take the view that the millions of random decisions taken by individuals over how they should lead their lives lead to better decision-making, better allocation of resources, and overall a more contented and unified society.
That's going to... There are a lot of people who... You've heard the phrase, anybody but Boris. There's something going on in Parliament, isn't there, at the moment, where people are trying... There are two sides, definite sides, Boris being one of them, and you. How much of a... Are you worried about the alternative campaign?
Well, the Home Secretary will no doubt have a lot of support. She's been a very distinguished Home Secretary and a very long-serving Home Secretary. But again, she supported Remain. And I think a lot of the people supporting Remain candidates...
She played it very carefully.
She supported Remain. That was the side to which she nailed her colours, and therefore it's very hard to think that she would be able to do a tough negotiation with the European Union, because that's not in principle where her position is. In principle, her position is to remain a member of the European Union, and I think that weakens her candidature. It's also a continuation of the same, that I think one of the things we should remember about this vote, that it is a rejection of the existing establishment. And I say that knowing full well that I'm pretty much a child of the establishment. But the British people have said we've had enough of that establishment. And I think Boris represents something new and change, whereas Mrs May, with all the great qualities that she's got, represents continuity of the old establishment. But I've been saving up talking about J.M. Barrie and Peter Pan, because I actually remember when the bill went through in 1988, brought forward by the late noble Lord Callaghan, former Prime Minister, to extend the copyright on Peter Pan indefinitely. And the reason I remember it is I remember a speech by the late noble Lord Charteris, because he started by pointing out that Captain Hook was an Old Etonian. And Lord Charteris at that point was the Provost of Eton, and therefore it was immediately relevant and of interest to him. But it's also of interest to me because it has to be said, Madam Deputy Speaker, that there are all sorts of Old Etonians. There are the great and the good. The greatest figures in the land, our Prime Minister himself is an Old Etonian, and he's one of the good lot. But we have at the other end the rogues gallery of Old Etonians, where Captain Hook stands proud along with people like Lord Lucan. You know exactly what I mean. And Captain Hook in that role is there to frighten the children, to keep them well behaved, to make sure, like Bonaparte was used in earlier times, to frighten badly behaved children. And I'm rather proud of the fact that it is an Old Etonian who fills this role, that it rebalances the scales so that we don't mislead people so that they think all Old Etonians are just these wonderful fellows. There are also one or two in the rogues gallery, and we do balance it. I mean, only in the last week the new James Bond film is out, and James Bond is, of course, another Old Etonian. So we've got some good historic characters, as well as some villains who are there to remind people that it is a serious school that produces people who will take all sorts of different sides in the various cases. But what is happening with Peter Pan and Great Ormond Street Hospital is a great combination of good sense and generosity. J.M. Barrie's generosity was remarkable. He left his royalties to various people. He left them to Great Ormond Street Hospital. He left some to Westminster School. And where I must declare an interest, he left some to the Garrick Club. And it has to be said that since the Winnie the Pooh money came in from the Garrick Club, the wine list has improved very considerably. So we all have a lot to be grateful to J.M. Barrie for, either directly or indirectly. I give way to my fellow Garrick member.
I hate to contradict my proposer, but I think it was A.A. Milne who gave his royalties to the Garrick, not J.M. Barrie.
I was confusing my authors of children's literature. Yes, I got Winnie the Pooh right. I was just attributing it to the wrong man. I'm so grateful for that correction. So I don't have an interest to declare. I must de-declare my interest in relation to the topic on which I was talking. But it's a wonderfully generous thing to do, and the flexibility in allowing the copyright law to be adapted so that one particular play may provide resources for a particular hospital where the two come together, because we all know the story very well, the childhood story, the Peter Pan, the ever-youthful, Madam Deputy Speaker, as I look at you, I see the ever-youthful Deputy Speaker, and that is a great story to combine with a children's hospital, a hospital that is there to take care of those at their weakest time, not just from London, but as we've heard already, from across the country.
We can speak to the Conservative MP and prominent Leave campaigner during the EU referendum, Jacob Rees-Mogg. He's at our studios in Westminster. Thank you for joining us. I'm sure you've scoured everything that Sir John had to say. This is the second former Prime Minister, both from different parties, that have felt the need to come out and warn not just the public but the government about concerns that they have in their experience about how Brexit has been handled.
Yes, well, the British electorate voted against what they recommended last year. And you have to remember that St John Major was remarkably unsuccessful in his own dealings with the European Union. He got us into the exchange rate mechanism, which was a catastrophe economically, and his failings in dealing with the European Union led to him taking to the Conservatives to their heaviest defeat for the best part of a century.
So you're saying this is personal. He actually admitted in his speech that the EU is not perfect. He's not talking about the EU, he's talking about Brexit. He's talking about what it means for Britain. He didn't say there should be another referendum. He said he's concerned about the way Brexit has been negotiated and handled. It's a very negative speech, and it's pointing towards a second referendum. If you look at the bottom of page 13 of his speech, you will see a comment. He says, the more one examines probabilities, the more contentious becomes the task of leaving. That implies that he's not actually accepting the result of the referendum, that we are leaving. I think it's rather a bitter speech by a Prime Minister resoundingly rejected by the electorate in 1997 and his views once again rejected last June. Can we just talk about a few of the things that he pointed out? He said that there was too much optimism for a good deal for Britain. He expressed concern about the way the government was treating European Union leaders. He said there needs to be more statesmanship, and he warned about the reliance on the United States. Well, let's take those points in turn. The first point, I think, is completely fatuous, that when you enter a negotiation, any sensible person goes into a negotiation full of optimism and expecting a good result. To go into the negotiation wearing sackcloth and ashes and to say that it's all going to be a disaster, as Mr. Major, Sir John Major, suggests, would be absurd, and perhaps that's why he was so unsuccessful in his European negotiations. As regards our relations with European partners, actually I think Mrs May has been very positive, very friendly towards them, and has emphasised that it is the EU we are leaving, not Europe, and she's tried to be as generous as possible to EU nationals who are already here, only to be stymied by Mrs Merkel. And in regards to the point on the United States, I was surprised by his anti-US positioning, that the US is a close ally for us, but that he thinks the whole world is the US and Europe. It isn't. It's China, it's India, it's Brazil. We've got to look to the international field rather than purely the narrow EU sphere. Well, Jacob, let me pick you up on that, because already Theresa May has been to India and agreed to relax visa regulations for Indians, particularly Indian students, but also those that want to come and live and work in India. So that could mean more immigration. And you know that one of the central messages of the referendum campaign to leave was about immigration. And EU leaders have made it very, very clear we cannot remain in the single market if we will not allow free movement into the UK. Well, I don't want to remain in the single market because it's a regulatory trap. The regulations we get from the EU relate to the single market and have made our industry less competitive. So there could be no deal then? No, we're not going to remain in the single market. Mrs May has made that absolutely clear. She made that clear at her speech at Lancaster House. That's different from not having a deal. The deal will be broader simply than the single market. On your point on immigration, the question is, we will decide. And it may very well be in our national interest to have IT engineers from India coming, rather than having Bulgarians coming over without so much as a by your leave. There's a lot of fear as well about the so-called cliff edge. If a deal can't be reached, we still have to leave anyway. How can you assure people tonight, those who voted for Brexit, that this isn't leading over the cliff edge, that Britain isn't going to suffer, as John Major said tonight, economically as well as politically?
John Major and the people like him have been forecasting disaster again and again. It is the same old tune, the cracked record. I would say it's like Cassandra, except she got her forecasts right. It's just nobody believed her. They are full of gloom and depression, and they've turned out consistently to be wrong. That there are ways of dealing even with a cliff edge, though I happen to think the cliff edge is unlikely, that there are WTO terms that we can fall back on, and that trade will continue because the British people want to carry on buying German cars and the Germans want to carry on using UK financial services, and that's done by individuals, not by states.
Jacob Rees-Mogg, thank you very much